Sometimes, when the lights are low, you just got to have a fast prime lens to get the job done. Let's talk about that. Hey, thanks for joining me. So I had a chance recently to go to a museum here in Oklahoma City called the First Americans Museum. It's a relatively new museum, and the term First Americans is a little bit new to me. Up until recently, I think we use the term Native Americans more commonly, but the First American Museum has just some amazing artifacts and art and history of the First American, the people. And, we have 77 tribes here in Oklahoma. So their art and their culture and their history is very much a part of Oklahoma's art, culture, and history. So I was really excited to go to this museum. Something you have to understand about this museum is that a lot of these artifacts are very colorful, and light fades those colors of those artifacts. And so you're not allowed to use a flash. The lighting is very subdued, and if you want to get pictures, you're going to need a lens fast enough that you can handhold. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about some super speed f1.2 or 0.095 f-stop maximum aperture lens. You don't have to have that. In fact, the lens I used on this is this Panasonic Lumix 20mm f1.7. And today's modern lenses, the prime lenses, are really good enough that you can shoot them wide open or maybe just a half stop down and get excellent image quality. And so this lens really worked out to be just a perfect match for this. Being 20mm on micro four thirds, that's equivalent to a 40mm on a full frame camera. It's very slightly wide. It's a little wider than a normal, but not quite as wide as, say, a 35mm lens would be on a full frame. Maximum aperture of f1.7 is not super fast, but fast enough, and especially with the Olympus cameras, their mirrorless cameras have amazing image stabilization. So this camera, this is the EP5, has 5-stop image stabilization. I'm able to successfully handhold without being braced against something, eighth of a second pictures really pretty easily. If I can get braced up against something, then even 1 second exposures are possible. So this camera, this lens really made a great combination. Now, the other thing that is kind of good about micro four thirds in this situation is you get, even at those maximum apertures, you get a little bit more depth of field than you would with a full frame camera. So it's really kind of a great setup. It's one of the reasons these cameras are popular for travel, is in that they just are not only compact and all that, lightweight, the kind of things you want for a travel camera. They also have some advantages, in terms of like the depth of field. But anyway, this lens, the 20mm f1.7, really worked out well. I've got some images, at towards the end here. I'll show you these images, and I think you'll agree that this lens worked out really well. Now, you don't have to go buy a real expensive prime lens for this kind of photography. And in fact, for a camera that you're going to travel with, something that's compact maybe is better. But, Olympus certainly makes, a 25mm f1.8, which is, 50mm equivalent. Make a 45 f1.8 if you needed something a little bit longer. But remember, the longer focal lengths, a little harder to handhold at low light. If you're shooting another brand of camera, full frame or APS-C, there's going to be either a wide angle, slight wide angle, like a 35mm equivalent, or a 50mm equivalent f1.8 lenses are pretty common, and they're generally pretty affordable. I think 50mm lenses on full frame cameras are relatively an affordable item. So you don't, again, if you want to go buy an f1.4 or an f1.2 or 0.095 or some crazy fast lens, that's completely fine. It's not really probably necessary for this. I'm able to take, with this camera, I can set an ISO, depends on the lighting, set the camera at maximum aperture. Some of the pictures you'll see I shot at, most of them were at f1.7, wide open. A few of them I did stop down to f2.2, which is one, when I rotate my dial on the camera, it's one stop down, or one click down rather. That's like probably a half stop, f2.2, from 1.7. But it, so the lens is basically shooting maximum aperture. And like I said, with the image stabilization, set an ISO that's fast enough that I can get shutter speeds that are hand holdable, but still not so fast maybe that grain starts to be an issue. And so this is one of those times where digital cameras really shine compared to the old. I love film cameras, but this is where they really shine. Now, if you're into vintage lenses, there's just a myriad of fast 50mm f1.4 lenses. This is a Nikkor. The thing about a lot of your older film lenses, however, is that they're not as good in a lot of cases wide open, like at f1.4, as like today's lenses are. So in a lot of cases, these faster lenses, you can shoot pictures at f1.4. They're not going to be quite as sharp at the edges as you might find on a modern lens. One of the reasons I, for example, use this little Takumar 55mm f2 lens is not only is it really compact, this lens being f2, I can shoot it wide open and the image quality is excellent. So if you're into vintage lenses, I'm not going to try to review a bunch of different 50mm vintage lenses. Reviews are out there, and if you have some, you've probably shot them and but there's a lot of choices for vintage lenses with fast, speeds. There's a lot of 35mm f1.8, f2 vintage lenses. They can get a little bit more pricey, but they're also very good. So like I say, with the Olympus cameras, Olympus makes a 17mm f1.8. That's excellent. Like I say, they make a 25mm 45. A lot of those lenses would be great for that. And again, you don't have to break the bank. This Lumix 20mm f1.7, and this is the early version. There is a later version of this, but these are very affordable. So anyway, that's kind of what I wanted to get you guys thinking about. Like I say, today you buy a camera, you typically are going to get a wide angle to telephoto zoom lens. Most cameras these days don't come with a prime lens, and I think a lot of photographers miss out on some low light level image opportunities because their lens just won't handle it. It would require either running the ISO up too high or shutter speeds that are too slow to be hand holdable. So anyway, that's just a thing I think most photographers ought to have in their kit, is a good, decently fast prime lens, so that you can handle those kind of low light situations. I keep a lens hood on this one. This is actually one I bought on eBay. It looks like a rangefinder lens hood. It's got these slots in it. But it was, I think I paid like $8 or $10 for it on eBay. And, when I'm shooting these, I don't want to, used to be a lot of photographers would put a rubber lens hood on their camera so they could like mash it right up against the glass to prevent reflections. And I try not to touch the glass. I don't want to leave any fingerprints on the glass. I don't want to leave anything behind that somebody has to clean up. And even a rubber lens hood will leave some, some residue on the glass. So I try not to touch the glass at all. In most cases, there's nothing I can, brace myself against. So I try to lock my arms against my side. And it's one of the advantages of a camera with a screen versus a viewfinder. And it works really well in the low light conditions of a museum. You can kind of lock your arms against your sides. You can kind of look at the screen, and you can get everything composed. Works really well. And so this camera, this EP5, I think it's a great museum camera. Anytime I go to a museum, this is my kit right here. But I try to, get close to the glass so I can eliminate reflections. Sometimes the display is big enough that you have to back up. You're going to get some reflections in the glass. And when you look at my images, you'll see some of those. I have not made any attempt to clean up the images, remove reflections, or things like that. Certainly with today's technology, you can, open the images up in Photoshop or any number of tools, applications, and you could remove the reflections. You can remove things that aren't, that are in the image that maybe you don't want. That's pretty easy to do these days. So I don't worry too much. I try to just position myself. I might have to move right or left, or shoot maybe down or up a little bit to try to move the reflections as far away from the center of the image as possible if I can't get rid of them altogether. If I can get right close to the glass, maybe just an inch or two away, I'll get real close to the glass, and that'll generally help eliminate reflections. Now, I had no trouble at all with the autofocus on this camera working through the glass. It in every case, it autofocused just right on the subject, and I didn't have any trouble at all. If you do, you can certainly switch to manual focus. There may be some autofocus systems out there that have an issue with the glass, but I didn't with this camera. So anyway, I typically shoot on Aperture Priority, set the aperture of the lens wide open or nearly so, and set an ISO in the camera that will allow me to have the shutter speed I need to hand hold it, and take some pictures. And again, like I say, you're not allowed to use flash in these places because the light from the flash would deteriorate the color and the subjects that you're photographing. So I always just would say, when you're in these museums, be very respectful of where you're at, and not messing up any displays, not touching things, and trying to stay out of other people's way. If there's groups of people coming through and I'm in their way, I try to step back and let people go by, and then I'll go back, take my pictures. So I would just say, as a photographer, we represent photography when we go out and do these things. Make sure you're not, doing things that mess up the museum or cause other people to clean up things behind you, or certainly, you don't want to touch or damage anything that is valuable. So most of those things are put out of reach, but some museums have displays that if you tried, you could touch things, you could mess with things, and I just would say don't do that. Let's be respectful of those places. Anyway, let's take a look at some of the images I have. We'll run through a few of them, and then I'll catch you on the other side. Well, there you go. I hope you enjoyed those images. I really loved that museum. I love museums in general. I'm a real history buff. I love going to museums and seeing artifacts from the past and reading the displays and learning about the past. I think museums give us a chance beyond history books to actually experience history a little bit. And that's one of the things I love going to museums, and I'm fascinated by them. Unfortunately, here in Oklahoma City, we have quite a few of them, and they're a lot of fun to go to. Some are better lit than others. This one, of course, is very subdued lighting, so this setup was just perfect for it. Well, if you have any thoughts or questions, please don't hesitate to leave me a comment. I always love hearing from you, and hope you'll get your cameras out and go visit some museums. And as always, thanks for watching.